Yeah, I'll introduce our next talk with Brian Okken. Sharing is caring, sharing PyTest Fixtures. Brian Okken's pronouns are he and him. He is also available for Q&A after talk in Benulous or in person. About Brian, he's the host of Python Bytes. If you haven't heard of it, you can look it up online. And also Test of Code podcasts. He's also an author. He's written Python Testing with PyTest, and Brian's also a software engineer. And let's give a warm round of applause for Brian.
I'm going to talk about sharing PyTest fixtures. That's a weird thing to talk about, though. The slides in the code are both at pythontest.com/PyCascades 2023. I just uploaded them this morning and then edited them like 3 times since then. I am on a couple podcasts. Python Bytes delivers Python news and headlines directly to your earbuds once a week. Test and Code used to be the Python Test podcast, and it's less frequent, but still going. It's not dead. I wrote Python Testing with PyTest to try to help people learn PyTest, and then I actually tried to use it to teach people, and it didn't work that well. So I rewrote it completely for the second edition. I'm not going to do a complete rewrite again, but I enjoyed it. I also train people. So online you can do a 3-hour whirlwind fast tour of PyTest. Go to pythontest.com courses. That's the online version. I also do corporate training, so I can train an entire team all at the same time. It's really kind of fun. I'm also a lead software engineer, and I do C++ for embedded systems. And that seems like one of these things is not like the other. But it's actually that involvement with RF test systems that drew me to PyTest. That seems also weird. So why? Well, because of the multi-level PyTest fixtures. They're amazing. At the beginning of a session, I can connect to an instrument. At the beginning of a module or a function, I can set up a waveform or set up routing, set up connectors. There's a lot of setup you got to do with RF equipment. And then at the end, I can do things like read the error logs and other reset, make it into a safe state. So that's useful. So I actually just think PyTest fixtures are awesome. I love them. PyTest is awesome. I hope you love PyTest. You are awesome. Because you're here, right? I mean, even if you're remote, I think you're awesome. You care about this enough to show up. This is nice. It also helps that there's nowhere else for you to go. And I have confidence that if you embrace fixtures, you're going to make some fixtures so awesome that you want to share them with maybe yourself on another project or another team. So if you're unfamiliar, let's do a little quick, what is a fixture? A fixture is just a function. And it's got a pytest.fixture decorator around it. And you can do some setup ahead of time, and you can do some teardown afterwards, and you can either return or yield something to the test that uses it. In this case, I'm using it to connect to a database, and this is a great use for fixtures. And any test that uses it can just use the DB name in its parameter list and use that object. In this case, it's going to do a setup and teardown for each fixture, for each test, because it's a function scope by default. But we can set it up so that it does a connection at session or at module time too, and that's where the multi-level thing comes in handy. That's actually so useful that we're not going to use that in this talk. We're going to do something really silly, like colorful print statements. Yes, we can do this with a fixture as well. You can do it without a fixture, but that's the talk. So we'll zoom in. I've got a magenta fixture, and I'm going to start, what is that? When we're using it, I'm going to use it with -s. And the -s, because normally PyTest just like sucks all of your output and keeps it. And that's on purpose, so that you don't get all of the output for things that are passing. Pass silently, fail loudly is one of the Unix philosophies. And PyTest uses that philosophy as well, so by default, you don't see the output. But I want to show you the output. So you can do -s or capture equals no to turn that off, So here's our magenta statement. This is nice. But it also shows test magenta. So this is what it looks like in action. I've got a test magenta function, and it's using the magenta fixture, and it's using that as a function. So it's obviously getting that function object from somewhere, and it's passing in this should be magenta. But the output actually also shows the function name, so we're going to have to do that somehow also. Here's the code for it. I import pytest, and I just have the magenta function that has a pytest fixture decorator, and I'm returning something. Specifically, I'm using functools partial so that I can have a partial binding to a function. And the function I'm binding is color print, and I'm passing in magenta, which happens to be this ASCII key sequence, which I just learned about recently. They're fun things to play with. They work on most terminals. They don't work on Windows that well, except for if you use Colorama. And luckily, pytest has already used Colorama if it needs to. So within pytest fixtures, you can use these colors. There's also other things like reset and bold that I'm using. Okay, so I'm partially binding color print. I'm passing in magenta. Request node name looks weird, and it's just the name of the test function. It's one of the ways you can get the test function name. So that's how we're getting it. And then our color print function, that just takes a color, the string, which is one of these magenta in this case, the function name, which I'm getting from request node name, and then some text. And that's what I'm getting from the test. The test passes that in, so that's the unbound parameter to color print. So that's cool. And then it just rearranges those in a nice order so that the output prints out. And I didn't have to use partials for this. You could just return a function, define a function and return a function. That would be easy. But I wanted it to be a one-liner so that if I could do a whole bunch of colors and make them all one-liners and fit it all in one slide. So that we can use all of them, and you can use multiple fixtures within a test. Here I'm using all of the colors to make this nice, pretty rainbowy output. I like it. So I've got all these fixtures, and I've used them within my test, and that's nice. And it was fun, but I can't share them with anybody because they're stuck within the test file. I have to get them out of there. So let's free them. We've got to set them free and put them in a conf test file. That's the first way we can share things, and it's that file right there. I've got a conf test file and 2 example tests. So our tests, I've took them out of the original test file. So conf test, it's just everything without the test. It's got all the my fixtures, the color print function, all the ASCII sequences are defined there. And now my test doesn't have to have all that junk in it. It can just be a test file. And then I can have more tests that use the fixtures also, so I can share those between tests. So great. Talk over, we've shared fixtures between tests. And that all works as long as everything's in the same directory. Well, what if they're in different directories? Can I still share them? As long as they're subdirectories, you don't have to do anything different. You can just put them all in subdirectories, and pytest will look all the way up to the test root, which is where your pytest any file is, or tox any, and it will look at all the conf test files for fixtures. So as long as it's your test is in a subdirectory, it'll find them. And you can even have multiple conf test files, and as long as the colors are in one of the parents of the test, you can use it. But how about sharing between projects? Okay, so we have to stop just using conf test files. We need to do something else. This is where it really gets fun. So we're going to start with what we had before, just a test directory with a conf test, a couple examples, and we're going to go to this. It's not as bad as it looks at first. And yes, we're going to talk about packaging. And we're going to talk about building a pytest plugin. Actually, packaging pytest plugins is really what the talk is about. But if I titled that, you probably wouldn't have showed up. So it's not actually that bad if we walk through the steps. So how do we get from here to there? Well, let's go through everything. First off, I'm just going to rename the directory name. It's really going to be a plugin, and we're going to call it pytest-crayons. PyTest plugins are usually pytest-something. They could be named anything, but that's a tradition, and I'll stick with it for now. And then we're going to take all the stuff in ConfTest, that's our fixtures and all the color print and all that stuff, and we're going to put it, actually it's just, you could just rename the file. I'm going to call it pytest-crayons. I'm going to call it something, it's going to show up and it's going to get installed in the site packages later. So I want to call it something that is unique to this. I could have used a source directory. I used to be somebody that really tried to get everybody to use source directories. I've kind of eased off a little bit, but they're cool. I could also put the whole thing in a package within my source directory or not, and then it would be a little different. I'll show you some of the changes, but for this simple example, I just want to keep it simple, so it's just a file. That works. My examples, I'm just going to copy them over into an examples directory. I could have put them in tests, that would have been fine, but I kind of like an examples directory just for plugins, just to have like a simple example of how to use the plugin. It's kind of fun when you're installing something new to just try it out. It's a nice thing. So that's what we have so far. We've got all the existing stuff moved over. There's a whole bunch of other stuff we have to do, but there's really not that much more to do. First off, here's all the new stuff. I've got a license file. The license can be whatever you want. You know, there's license generators or whatever. I've just used MIT for so long, and I don't even remember why I started using it. So it works. README can be whatever you want. Generally, try to actually include what your plugin does. Some people forget to write what the thing does at the top. And how to install it. It's usually just pip install the thing, but sometimes the name is a little different. So if it, especially, just include an installation thing. And usage, of course. I like to see examples with pictures because I'm a very visual person. If you can do a little animated thing, that's neat too. And then there's the pyproject.toml. All right, let's come back to that. The rest is tests and talks. Actually, let's go back to the pyproject.toml. It's easier. But this might be a time for a deep breath for me, maybe for you. But this is sort of changing, and I'm trying to keep up. But it's a dynamic thing, and I'm using a lot of these lightweight tools. Anyway, I don't think it's too bad. Here's the full thing. Okay, brace yourself. We're going to go through each of the pieces at the top, and I kind of have it separated. At the top, I've got the project metadata. So this looks like a lot, but it's really pretty simple. We've got the name of the plugin that we're going to make pytest-crayons, a description of what it does, a version for it. Oh, that's good. The authors, plural. There could be more. That's why it's a dictionary. You can add your email to it as well if you really want to publish your email on GitHub, but you don't have to. I like to include what version of Python this is applicable for. 3.7 is for PyTest plugins because PyTest only supports 3.7 and above for current versions, so why not? That's what I use. Tell everybody where the README is. Tell people where the file is, or the license file. And the reason why these formats are different, I'll go ask Brett. I think he knows. The dependencies, it's a PyTest plugin, so I depend on PyTest. That's great. And then I've got classifiers. Well, the classifiers, they're cool. They're optional, but they need to be exact matches. So don't wing this. Just look them up in pypi.org/classifiers or copy from somebody else. And then if you fill all that stuff correctly out, some of it shows up on the left side of PyPI when you publish it. So that's neat. I've got my classifiers there, the requires Python, and the license at the top. The license comes from the classifier. So if you don't list the classifier, it doesn't show up at the metadata at the top, currently. I've got a URLs section in here. It can be whatever you want. It's plural URLs. You can have more than one. It doesn't have to be named home. You can name these whatever. You can have source and, yeah, you can have multiple URLs. Entry point, this is the tricky part that's around PyTest, but it's not that tricky. It just has to be PyTest 11. I knew at one point why it was 11, but I forgot. I don't remember. The format is plugin name equals module. The plugin name is wishy-washy. You can put really whatever you want in there. The module name has to be exact match. If I would have gone with the source PyTest package with a plugin underneath when it's under init, then you have to, it's not module then, it's like package.module. That's how you do that. But we didn't. We just have the simple module. The build system, I'm using Flit core for this example, and that's what Flit documentation tells me to put in there, so that's why that's there. The last bit is the Flit module, and that's there because my project name is different. So PyTest projects are PyTest dash something, but the module name can't be a dash. It has to be an underscore or just gone. So that's why it's different. The modules with underscores, PyTest plugins were dashes for names. So that's the whole thing. And if you don't want to use Flit, that's fine. The Flit specific stuff I've kept on the bottom of this example. Here it is again. Just delete it and replace it with like hatch link stuff. That's what you would put for hatch. Setup tools works too. And I was surprised that like for the most part, that's all you had to change and the rest of it just works. Anyway, that wasn't too bad. And we haven't really done anything. We just defined all this stuff. But we don't have to do anything more. We could just push it up. We can share it right now. You can just push it to a Git repo, and that works. You can just, we can install it directly from Git, pip and Git. So you can say pip install Git plus and that. And it just hopefully works. We haven't tested it yet. But you can even put that in a Git, requirements file. And I'm including this little syntax because that was new to me when I first ran across it. And if you're going to publish projects within your team that you're not publishing outside and you don't have an internal PyPI thing, this is a great way to just share things in between projects, is just grab it directly from the repo. But we haven't built the wheel yet, of course, but pip install will build it. When you do pip install, it'll download everything and build the wheel before it installs it. So I really hope that the build works. And I want to do more than just hope it works, so I think we should test the packaging. And I'm going to show you how to test it. Look, some tests. This is what we haven't covered so far. We're going to use talks for testing packaging and running our tests in multiple platforms and multiple Pythons, and use PyTester for testing the plugin. So let's start with talks. You could use Nox also. Nox is great. I'm using talks in this example. Here's a basic talks.ini file. It's got all the Python versions that I want to test against. I don't want it to barf if I don't have one of these installed, so I say skip missing interpreters. The isolated build flag, that just tells talks that this is a PyProject TOML-based project. And for each environment, run PyTest. That's all you have to have, that little bit. I'm also using this as my pytest.ini file, so you can throw your PyTest settings in there too. And you can run talks. There, running talks will create a virtual environment, build a wheel, install all the dependencies, install your code, run the test, and then do that again for every Python version. That's pretty cool. And it's really pretty quick. Here's an example with just one Python 3.11. So what is it running? I've told it to run examples and tests. It's running our examples. So those examples are using the fixture. That's cool, so we know those work, or at least they don't blow up. But I'd like to test to make sure it's really doing what I think it's going to do, and so that's what I'm going to show you how to do now. I'm going to use a thing called PyTester, and it's a fixture that's off by default because most people using PyTest, unless they're plugin authors, don't really need it. But you have to turn it on, and you turn it on in a conf test file with this flag. So here's my test to test the plugin. Like I said, I'm using PyTester. PyTester has a whole bunch of cool features like copying. You can copy files, and I'm copying the example into a temporary directory to run. You can make Python files with it. I'm here creating an empty dunder-init.py file. I'm running PyTest with the -s so that I can see the output. I can check the output to make sure everything's passing, but you can check for failures or skips or whatever. And then I'm actually checking for all these ASCII codes now to make sure the output's correct. That's it, but we're actually testing a lot now, and it really wasn't that much work to test all this stuff, including testing packaging on multiple versions of Python. So I'm pretty confident it's going to work, so I think I'll share it now. But is that enough to share it with everybody on PyPI? Actually, yeah. I'm not going to go through the details, but publishing to PyPI is not that hard. You register. I like to do both the testpypi.org and the full thing. Build it and publish it. That's it. You can use flit, hatch, or build to build it. Even if you're using flit or hatchling in the background, you can use build to build it. It's cool. To publish, flit, hatch, or twine. And there you go. It's all up online. If you really don't want to, like if you're doing an internal project and you want to make sure nobody accidentally publishes to PyPI, you can throw a private classifier in, and then PyPI will reject it. So that's pretty cool. Thanks, Brett, for letting me know about that. So we've covered actually quite a bit of sharing PyTest fixtures, but hopefully that wasn't too scary. And if you'd like to know more, I know a book that you could read. No, I do cover a lot more about fixtures and about building plugins, and even talk about hooking up GitHub Actions. That's fun. So please, yes, I'm available for questions whenever you see me, or you can, if you think about questions later, you can reach me with one of these forums and hit me up for questions. That's it.